Hvala.
Thank you. My name is Nura Begovic. I am from Srebrenica, and I'm here as a representative of the Association of the Women from Srebrenica. I am here as an individual, but there are thousands and thousands of those who are still in search of the remains of their dearest and nearest ones. And I really want to commend you as a moderator to draw our attention to the fact that we need to focus on the topic. But I would not like you to allow your panelists to speak as if they did not come from a certain ethnic community. Just as Bogdan stated a moment ago, there are members of certain communities here who, listening to what you have to say, feel offended. It was stated that other crimes committed by people from other sides had not been tried before the ICTY. Well, that's not true. We would not want to heighten tensions among the communities coming from the former Yugoslavia. The specific problem we're dealing with here is the problem of the archives and the documentation, which is in possession of the ICTY, and the issue of who should be the custodian of that.
The audience at the last.
Let me put a specific question. Ms. Kandic and what Mr. Tokac had to say, well, that's all very well, but let me give you an example where I was present as an observer in the Serbian court when members of the Scorpion group were on trial. The only support that victims and witnesses received was the one that came from the International Humanitarian Law Center, Madam Kandic, because Natasha, as well as other families of witnesses and us who were observers, were all at risk from these perpetrators of war crimes. I really appeal to you to think well before you decide who should be entrusted with the archives. Should the archives be housed by local courts, or who else? You know that we have mono-ethnic courts in the former Yugoslavia. How can we entrust the archives and the documentation?
I hear what you say, and I heard that discussion in the last panel. I must enforce that. Let's go over here. Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to address this gathering. But this is a sign indicating that there is no Bosnia-Herzegovina, that there is no reconciliation, and that there is no coexistence. So what we heard here, it is true that it is very difficult to reconcile when on the one hand you have Muslims, Catholics and Orthodox. Mr. Cekic, a question to you. You say that you were dealing with the Commission for Srebrenica where genocide was established. I can see that the data you've been providing us with do not really hold. But let me ask you this. Do you have information to the effect, or rather the numbers of individuals who died a natural death in Srebrenica and those who were killed, and I mean Bosniaks in Srebrenica in that period? Do you know that 3,256 Serbs were killed in Srebrenica? Why didn't you focus your research on that? Let me ask you this as well. You were on the Commission for Sarajevo, the aim of which was to investigate into the sufferings of the Serbs. According to the information we have, as many as 20,000 perished. You, Mr. Cekic, as part of that commission, were investigating how many bricks were destroyed, because you consider bricks more valuable than a Serb's life. Third question, now that you mentioned Srebrenica. Srebrenica was under UN protectorate. Can you tell us How many Serbs were killed in that UN protected zones by Nasser Oric? And can you tell us who it was who shipped weapons to him over there? Thank you.
Yes, Professor. No, just a minute.
Izvolite.
Professor.
Please allow me to reply.
Yes, please, go ahead. Wait, come on. Are we going to cooperate with each other? If we can't cooperate in this room, we've got problems. Go ahead. Professor Savage. It's Savage.
Professor Čekić, I spoke as a scholar, as a person who does research and who tries to establish the empirical facts in this very complex situation where we are observing a society and a community and an event such as genocide and crimes against humanity and other crimes of against international law. In view of the fact that the gentleman who put these questions is trying to politicize the question rather than provide or seek scholarly answers, I will abstain from answering, although I would be glad to provide an answer to this and similar questions. Well, I would just like to say, in the context of your question now, if we are unable to cooperate here in this room, then we're in big trouble. I think that a lot of what we heard here today in this hall, and also what we usually term as the tribunal legacy, to me, it looks like we're discussing minor issues while our house is on fire. Because from what we've been able to hear here today and what we've heard from these two different camps, two opposed camps in Bosnia and Herzegovina, these are the dominant narratives in the region. I am not denying that there are certain initiatives, and if we could analyze today what we've heard in this hall today, one thing that we could see is that all those who have established the tribunal, the UN Security Council, the European Union, and all of these, all of the participants in this debate, the issues that they are touching upon are two major groups of issues: the rule of law and the civil society. The states which actually have the levers of power are completely getting away with impunity. So what you hear about people here today, those are the prevailing opinions and perceptions of the tribunal. I'm afraid that Mrs. Kandic is a bit selective when she says that she's never heard anyone who would actually criticize the tribunal. But I will mention here the president of Republika Srpska, who claimed that in spite of the sentences passed to the two generals of the Republika Srpska army, Galić and Dragan Milošević, there was no Markale massacre, and that there was no massacre at the water fountain by the Serbs, that it was actually staged by the Muslims. And even in the case of Srebrenica and the sentence that was passed about that, I don't even want to mention that, or the fact that most of these representatives of the states call the sentences passed by the tribunal scandalous, ridiculous, and so on. So all I would like to say is this: the discussion on the tribunal's legacy must have in view the context in which it is evolving. And what we're saying here today and what we've heard here today, I'm not trying to say that they're illegitimate positions, but we have to be aware of the context in which this debate is being actually debated.
If I understand what you're saying, and I want to pull us back to the topics, we'd probably get a yes to all of the topics. Well, certainly the first one and the second one. That is, the legacy and the records can be used for historical purposes and peace building. But where we are now is once the tribunal is gone, and when you have this legacy, these records and these judgments, how can they later be used by states within the region? Is that where we are? Is that the conflict that we see? I don't know. I see a lot of discussion about, well, put the archives here. Make them under the control of civil society in a particular state, or maybe under international control. Perhaps, these questions can be answered yes, but we need to go on further if we are to hope to bring about reconciliation. And the gentleman over there who said reconciliation can never be accomplished, I can't believe that everyone in this room, or even the majority, would agree with that. Yes, Murshad, just comment on the question.
George Orwell je rekao, ko kontroliše prošlost, kontroliše budućnost.
Well, George Orwell said that whoever controls the past controls the future. What we have here is that the culture of memory in the region is actually slave to myths. We are imbued with hatred. A Bosniak, from his point of view, and I am a Bosniak, if I may say so, although I don't like to speak of that, is so involved with his own tragedy that he doesn't realize that the other side has a tragedy as well. The Serbs, or in Kosovo and so on, they are also slaves of their own myths. And in fact, we are unable to look at each other in the eye, and not only look each other in the eye, but also listen to what the other side has to say. What Mr. Čekić said, I can sign on to that. But we, each of us, have our own personal truths. Munira's truth is her truth about the suffering of her kids, her children, and no one has the right to take it away from her. As well as it is true for Mr. Dukic that someone took him out, beat him up, shattered his ribs, or whatever else he did. So we keep ignoring things because of our narrative, and our past narrative has been that only my truth and only my tragedy is what is valuable. And this comes as a result of the time in which and the way we were brought up. We were deeply ideologically indoctrinated, and we are unable to actually cross over this threshold and move away from a manipulative sort of thinking, because it's obvious that people are being manipulated and people are unable to accept obvious truths. Even if you were to place the tribunal's archives in Sarajevo tomorrow, and there is a 100% consensus on it, there will still be people who will question whether the truths that were established by the tribunal were actually absolute. So we have to work on our model of thinking. We have to demonopolize this process. You have political monopolies, and people are just there to be used as puppets, and if you need them, then on the next day you can pull them out and have them on a rally. If I remember, and Mr. Dukic, I'm talking to you now, there is a valid sentence for Celebici for the crimes that were committed there, and no one ever wanted to, so this was an established fact, but no one bothered to ever go down there and place a flower there as a memento, as Ms. Vesna said. What you have is people just try to manipulate things without any proof. So we should start thinking about these things not as Croats or Bosniaks, but as Professor Čekić said, we should try to think of scholarly truth, scientific truth, and the truth that we are all entitled to. The truth that we are entitled to as well, the Organization for Human Rights.